Second?
Second by Wolf.
Vento seconds.
Thank you. Roll call.
Thank you. Fredson,
Aye.
Sterner, Vento, Vento? I see her. She must need to rejoin. Zarin, did Vento come in yet? So she may need to drop and rejoin because I see an issue with her video. Okay, thank you very much.
No problem. And next item is the approval of the minutes from July 14th, 2020. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
Sterner will make a motion to approve the minutes.
And a second?
Zarin seconds.
Motion has been made and seconded. Roll call, please.
Fredson,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento. She must still be having problems. Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin.
Aye.
And Lindstrom.
Aye. Thank you. One item on our consent agenda, and that's the City of Chaska's 2040 comp plan and sewer plan. Mr. Colvin, oh no, we don't have, Kyle doesn't need to present on that. So is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Wolf moves approval.
Second. Mr. Sterner, would you like to second that?
Here, Lindstrom. Thank you.
Very good. Roll call, please.
Fredson,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin,
Aye.
and Lindstrom.
Aye. That
Thank
takes
you.
us to our, thank you, our one and only non-consent business item, which is declaration of emergency for the repair of an interceptor in Minneapolis. Ms. Clancy or Mr. Gordon?
And thank you, Chairman Lindstrom, committee members. This is Adam Gordon. A reminder, I'm a manager of the Interceptor Engineering Department. I'm here to present business item 2020-211, which is the ratification declaration of emergency for the repair of Interceptor 1MN320 at Van Wyck Memorial Boulevard and Fifth Avenue in Minneapolis. And if you're suffering a little case of deja vu, this area should be familiar because it was one of my first business items last year for emergency repair that we did just 3 blocks south of this current location. And if you go to the next slide, the interceptor at this location is constructed a little bit differently than the location where we had the repair last fall. The sanitary sewer is constructed underneath a storm sewer. And you might have remembered we had the sanitary interceptor is very old. It's constructed in 1889. It's one of our oldest pipes. And it's constructed underneath that storm sewer. And the access to our sanitary sewer is actually through the storm tunnel. And this is also known as, the storm tunnel is known as the Bassett's Creek Overflow. So it's the original tunnel in which Bassett Creek was put into back in the earlier part of the century. And if you go to the next slide, on July 17th, just a short while ago, the city was cleaning the storm sewer when they found the concrete slab floor of the storm sewer had been cracked and it pitched into the sand bed that lies between the storm tunnel and the sanitary interceptor. And there was a strong suspicion immediately at that point that this might have breached into the sanitary sewer below. And you can see that there's quite a bit of floor that had broken away. And you can see it at the side of the wall. It looks like things are missing, and it looks like the sand has been lost from beneath that floor of the storm sewer. If you go next slide. So we mobilized to the site with our televising crews and found that there was no breach into the pipe, and that things looked actually pretty good. And it's really important to remember that we had a cleaning project in this area last fall, and so we had video recording of the condition of the sewer along this stretch, and we didn't find any differences between the condition of last fall and the current condition. So things looked the same, and there was no breach and no collapse in the sewer. So we all sighed a heavy, deep breath. Next slide. But at the onset of the discovery of the damage to the storm sewer, there was a lot of concern, and we developed an emergency declaration to go through and make sure we had engineering services at hand and that we're prepared to remove broken concrete and remove any debris and make sure we repaired the tunnel and replaced the sand bed with some lightweight fill and replaced the slab and made sure we had covered our project communications. And we're looking at about $250,000. And part of this is the access to the sanitary sewer. Would have been difficult to mobilize into. Fortunately, it's already open because of the existing cleaning project the city has going on right now. They have a contractor who's closed off a street and has the storm tunnel open. But we're looking at about $250,000 to pick up our share of the cost with anything that we found to be defective. To date, just to update you, the city we've worked very closely with the city daily on their investigation. They're actually performing a lot of the work to remove the concrete slab from the storm sewer, to investigate the sand bed over the top of the interceptor. And they've been working with a consultant who's been making some investigation. And the last I heard most recently is they found that there was a storm lateral that was taking on a lot of the material that fell through. So we might be fairly lucky here. We're still investigating from the outside of the interceptor pipe, sanitary interceptor, if there's any breaches or any infiltration that's occurring there, and we might have to do some additional work to pick up our share of the cost of that repair with the city. But right now we're looking pretty good. We go to the next slide. I also wanted to bring up that we, since our last fall emergency declaration on a different location of this interceptor, we've been in regular meetings with the city about how we're going to eventually decommission the 1889 sewer. There's a lot of problems with that sewer foundation-wise, with the piling that's failed underneath the pipe. We have heavy sedimentation of that pipe. So there is a concept out there for actually building new pipe in this area to relieve and allow us to decommission the old pipe. So there is a replacement plan that we're working on, and we've been meeting with the planning department to discuss locations of potential lift station and working with the engineering department to look at their connections and just what that new routed pipe would look like. And we go to the next slide. So the proposed action for tonight is that the Metropolitan Council ratify the justification for the declaration of emergency repair of Interceptor 1MN320 at Van White Memorial Boulevard and 5th Avenue in Minneapolis, attached to the business item. And at this point, go next slide, Mr. Chair and committee members, I'd be pleased to take any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Gordon?
Well, Mr. Chair, I hate to have one for Mr. Gordon, if I may.
Please.
So, when I look at the workmanship and I could get 131 years out of a pipe, I think that's pretty extraordinary. What is our current workmanship? What kind of life do we get out of our current, most modern pipes that we're dealing with right now?
Yeah, and I think last year I actually alluded to, you can actually, you can date an engineer by the type of pipe they put in the ground. And our evolution of materials has always been constantly changing. I am always amazed, as you've seen from those photos, and I've seen photos that were taken from the 1880s of the construction of the pipe in black and white, of course. And they were hand moving earth or using animals, ox, whatever they had, and steam shovels. And there was a lot of workers that were not wearing hard hats because they didn't have them back then. And they were carefully mortaring together this pipe. And it is remarkable that it has performed as well as it has all this time. And that is a testament to basically the brick and mortar. Back in the 80s, when we put in a lot of concrete pipe into the ground, we didn't have so much luck because the concrete pipe was very much susceptible to H2S corrosion. Since then, we've been using a lot of newer materials, a lot of polymers, such as fiberglass mortar pipes and PVC. And those we're expecting to not have the same problems that we have with corrosion these days. So I would not find it unusual to find a PVC pipe 80 years later. In fact, we do have now PVC pipes that were installed 80 years ago. So that's good for us. I think we've had varying results through the decades, but we seem to be on a good path now.
It's interesting to think about if it's put in the 1880s, it's at the end of its useful life. But if it's put in the 1980s, it's also at the end of its useful life.
Yes, unfortunately so.
Not exactly a good statement to make, but true in many cases. And any other questions? And so you alluded to this, but there's a cost share to this project. I imagine they take care of most of the storm sewer aspect of the project, and we take care of the sanitary sewer aspects, the fill, any sort of patching to our pipe. Is that right?
That is correct, Mr. Chair. So yeah, we're right now, like I said, things are evolving every day. They are trying to get to the root of this problem before they get into too much rain. Again, we've already had one rainstorm go through, and they actually got to inspect the tunnel during the rainstorm and saw that in the area of the slab floor, it was taking on a lot of water and it was disappearing below the slab, which had them even more concerned. So it's important to get that repaired so it doesn't undermine their slab floor even more. When we prepared the declaration, we weren't quite sure just how extensive we were going to be involved in and how much damage there was going to be to our interceptor. But we're going to continue to work with the city of Minneapolis and make sure that if there's any corrections to the interceptor, we're ready to jump in and do it, especially now that the city has the storm sewer open and we don't have to worry about traffic control or anything like that because the streets are already blocked off.
Excellent. Anything else, committee? Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I motion. Zirin.
Motion
Fredson here, second.
seconded. Roll call, please.
Fredson,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin,
Aye.
Lindstrom.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. On to our information item for this afternoon, inflow and infiltration. Mr. Colvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee members. For the record, my name is Kyle Colvin. I am the manager of the Engineering Programs Group. And with me today is Marcus Bush. He will be presenting with me. The regional I&I program is administered out of the Engineering Programs Group. And so today we'll be giving you a little bit of an update. But first, if Marcus could just describe his role in administering the I&I program, then we'll proceed with the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle. Chair, committee members, thanks for having us today. I'm Marcus Bush. I'm a professional engineer, principal engineer in the engineering programs group under Kyle. Basically, my role is to work with the communities to let them know when they have excessive flows due to I&I, increased peak flows, and then also work with them in them sending us information about what they're working on and us working with you all and others to try to make sure they get grant funding or whatever they need to address their issues.
Thank you, Marcus. Next slide, Greg. The purpose of this presentation is to provide an overview, background, and key milestones of the I&I program. The presentation will also identify key steps that MCS plans to take to continue reducing clear water in the wastewater system. We will review the decades of cooperative work, integrated water management, sound policy decisions, consistent investments, and overcoming the technical, physical, and political challenges associated with separating a once interconnected stormwater and sanitary sewer system. Next slide. Today, the regional wastewater system treats wastewater from 2.8 million people in the 7-county area. The system is valued at $7 billion. That system includes 9 wastewater treatment plants and over 600 miles of large sewers called interceptors. The vast majority of wastewater infrastructure is owned by the cities that discharge to the regional system and the property owners that discharge their wastewater to each of the 110 communities that we provide service to. These private and public sewers combined are over 12,000 miles in length. That's the distance of halfway around the globe. Next slide. To keep our wastewater system working well, the residents, communities, and the region have been reducing I&I from entering those systems for decades. I think everyone on the committee knows what I&I is. However, for those listening in, I&I occurs in every wastewater system in varying degrees. It's short for inflow and infiltration, which are the methods that groundwater and stormwater enters the wastewater collection system. As a result, it is mixed with the wastewater and treated at one of our wastewater treatment plants. Reducing I&I entering the system costs less than trying to convey and treat that clear water after it enters the system. There are many ways stormwater and groundwater can enter the wastewater system, and it takes a combined effort from all involved to mitigate those sources. Next slide. From the late 1800s to the construction of the Metro treatment plant in 1938, and through the sewer separation projects in the 60s and 70s, and the regional I&I mitigation program effort since 2007, we are now at a point where it's been 10 years since there has been an overflow from the regional system to the river. This demonstrates that local and regional investments to separate the systems and reduce I&I are showing progress. Next slide. Today, our wastewater and stormwater systems are conveyed in separate systems and treated in different ways. Wastewater is treated at wastewater treatment facilities, and stormwater is treated according to best management practices and is available for infiltration back into the ground or reuse where appropriate, or return back into the environment. However, this has not always been However, this is not the way the original system was built nor operated. The initial construction of combined sewers began in the 1880s. Both stormwater and untreated wastewater was conveyed to and discharged to the river through a single system. In 1922, construction started on the first separation of storm sewers around the lakes and in newly developing areas of Minneapolis and St. Paul. In 1934, construction of the Metropolitan treatment plant began in St. Paul and began treating stormwater and wastewater combined system in 1938. In the 1960s, sewer separation started in Minneapolis and St. Paul in connection with infrastructure improvement projects. It is estimated that the two communities spent over $330 million in funds to build separate sewers. These projects were funded in part by state and federal funds. Ultimately, the city of Minneapolis alone diverted 4,600 acres of stormwater watersheds away from the wastewater collection system. Between 1986 and 1995, the PCA, metro area cities, and the NWCC agreed on a CSO permit with a 10-year sewer separation program, followed by 5 years of sewer system effectiveness evaluation. Next slide. The catalyst for today's regional I&I program was the July 1987 superstorm, where 16 inches of rain fell within a 1-week period. Excessive I&I in the Blue Lake Service District caused a failure in the river crossing pipe between Eden Prairie and Shakopee, resulting in untreated sewage to be discharged into the Minnesota River for over 2 weeks. The Metropolitan Waste Control Commission negotiated with the EPA and committed to a regional I&I study. This resulted in the EPA not issuing a consent decree. In
Kyle,
1990,
I'm sorry. Kyle,
Yep.
I'm sorry. This is Susan, to interrupt you. We have somebody that we've got some background noise. Can we have you go on mute, please? Thank you.
Thank you. In 1990, the in 1990, the Metropolitan Waste Control Commission completed a system evaluation which estimated that 20% of the regional annual wastewater flow was from I&I. The final report identified 2 approaches to reduce excess I&I in the system, one being an incentive program whereby communities would be given financial incentives to pursue I&I mitigation, and the second being a disincentive program reflecting financial penalties such as surcharges. The commission elected to implement an incentive program consisting of grants and loans. Between 1993 and 2000, the council offered over $1.3 billion in a series of grants and loans to communities to help fund local I&I mitigation projects. Then in 2002, the council completed a study on the effect that excess I&I had on the regional system and its ability and its impact on the ability to provide service for growth. The findings were that if I&I was not addressed, there would be insufficient capacity to provide for future growth. The recommended approach was to address I&I at its source versus increasing system capacity. The first I&I task force was formed in 2004. It reaffirmed the approach to mitigate excess I&I at its source and established a 5-year program. It also identified that a demand charge would be applied to those communities' wastewater bills who had not eliminated their excess I&I by 2013. Next slide. The regional I&I program began in 2004 with work plans assigned in 2007 to those communities having measured excess I&I. As a result of an October 2004 storm, 55 communities were assigned work plans. In 2009, a second task force was formed to address the pending demand charge scheduled to start in 2013. Recommendations from that task force was to defer any demand charge indefinitely, and the Water Resources Policy Plan was amended to reflect an ongoing mitigation program which we are still operating under. Following an extremely wet winter, and spring, a storm event in June 2014 resulted in the assignment of work plans to 42 communities. These June storms resulted in sewage backups in homes and the release of sewage in area lakes from the local collection systems. Recognizing the need to address I&I sources from private property, a third task force was formed. It further reaffirmed the need for a continued program and recommended the development of community tools and public education materials. It also requested the council assistance in advocating for funding sources for communities. Marcus will discuss the recommendations and outcomes of the 2016 task force a little later. Next slide, please. Now, this slide has been updated from a version that you previously were presented about a year ago. The council's I&I program began with system flow monitoring, as I stated, in 2004, and community responses to work plan assignments in 2007. Since then, regional population has grown by 10% and precipitation has increased by 16%. However, wastewater flows have been staying relatively flat or declining slightly during this period. This is significant when you consider the growth that occurred during this time period, and that during this period, the regional experienced 2 record annual precipitation records. There's a reduction in the wastewater flow due to water conservation that should be acknowledged. However, the peak flow reduction and capacity preservation is largely an effect of the I&I program. From a climate perspective, 2019 was the wettest year on record. Prior to adding the 2019 data to this chart, the regional flow trend was shown to be going down much more significantly than it does here. Total regional flow in 2019 was the highest since 2004. This demonstrates that wet weather still has a direct impact on regional flow and demonstrates the need for continued I&I work. However, it also shows that progress can be shown from the work that has been completed to date by the local communities. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, there have been 2 major storms since the beginning of the I&I program that are very useful in understanding the effectiveness of I&I mitigation. The October 2000 storm event, which in essence created the first assignment of community work plans, with the 55 community work plans being assigned, as I mentioned earlier, and the June 2014 storm event, which was preceded by a wetter period and was a larger storm in magnitude and in duration than the October 2005 storm. And yet wastewater flows at the 2 largest regional wastewater plants, at the Metro plant and at the Blue Lake plant, were lower in response to the 2014 storm event than they were in the 2005 storm event. And it is also important to stress that last year, again, was a record amount of rainfall recorded in the Twin City area since the start of data collection. Earlier today, I was talking to a watershed manager who indicated that their data that they've been looking at characterized the last 10 years being the wettest 10 years on record, the last 5 years being the wettest 5 years on record, and 2019 being the wettest year on record. So I think this clearly shows that as climate change progresses, the system will be taxed more and more often. I'll now turn it over to Marcus, who will summarize the I&I mitigation efforts both locally and regionally, the recommendations of the 2016 I&I task force in a little more detail, and some technical assistance material that the council has developed and made available to local communities to assist them in their I&I work. Marcus?
Thanks, Kyle. Greg, next slide, please. Am I coming in clear, Susan?
had to unmute. Yes, you are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you much. Apologies for the muting earlier. I didn't realize I'd come unmuted, so my apologies for that noise. Yeah, most regional communities have had I&I reduction programs in place, and not one has been assessed a demand charge to add capacity to their system, which I think is a pretty good success of the communities to do the I&I mitigation work. From around 2007 to 2017, communities reported over $175 million of work plan credits, which is the amount or only a portion of the construction costs that were done. For programs focused on service lateral repairs from the house to the main and the street and sump pump disconnections, communities have reported over $22 million in investments. Adding in rain leader disconnection programs by communities in the urban core, such as Minneapolis and St. Paul, the reported investment in private infrastructure exceeds $46 million through 2017. From 2010 to present, the state legislature appropriated $19 million in bonding funds for communities to mitigate I&I in the public wastewater systems. And investing to reduce I&I prevents sewage overflows, reduces costs, and allows communities to invest in other priorities. The approach of adding capacity has been attempted by other wastewater utilities in other areas of the country and has not been shown to effectively avoid spills, backups, or overflows. Next slide, please. We do work with the communities, and we'd like to highlight just a few of the programs and their success over the last decade or so. Environmental Services recently analyzed some of those programs to understand the effectiveness of both public and private I&I mitigation, and the results show that reducing I&I at the source, often at homes and businesses, is an effective way to reduce I&I with a great return on investment. For instance, from 2004 to 2013, Minneapolis was able to reduce peak I&I flows by 75% in one area of the community. They did so by reducing old rain leaders that carried water from the roof right to the sewer. They also have an extensive pavement management program and have reduced flows from sump pumps that were discharging to the sanitary sewer. And I know we've talked before, but yes, it is illegal to discharge the sump pump to the sanitary sewer. Next slide, please. The City of Golden Valley began a point of sale program in 2007 in response to the I&I program. Many aging service lines from the home to the city sewer have been inspected and repaired or replaced at the time of sale. Doing so reduced the peak inflow and I&I flows by 28% and helped to regain capacity needed for growth. Without reducing I&I, they may have had to add more capacity with larger sewers in order to grow and spend much more money than reducing I&I from the existing system. Next slide, please. And the city of West St. Paul began an inspection repair program in 2008, also in response to the I&I program by the Met Council. Through 2013, there was a 33% decrease in peak I&I flows. That decrease was realized during the time that the parcels shown in green were inspected at or repaired. There has been so much more work since then, shown in the orange, that even more reductions are expected. We're intending to run these models again this year to quantify those reductions, and I'm working on the project management of that now. Those inspections and repairs in green were aided by about $560,000 in grants administered through MCES. All three of these communities access grant funding as it was available to support these local projects and have increased the resiliency of the regional system by reducing excessive flows. Next slide, please. We've just shared how our customer communities are going about addressing I&I from private property, but as mentioned earlier, the council's interceptors need investment as well. In the past 10 years, about $1 billion has been invested in asset renewal in our wastewater infrastructure. About one half of this investment has been in the conveyance system to get the flow from the cities to our treatment plants. Many of these projects include work that prevent clear water from entering the system by installing cured in place pipe, replacing pipe, or rehabilitating manhole structures. Next slide, please. As we were talking before, there are definitely some rainy days ahead. The I&I program and work by communities has been incredibly successful at reducing the chance of overflows. Even with the new climate, flows are continuing to decrease. However, with increased intensity and frequency of rainfalls, we need to continue the work to keep the clear water out of the wastewater system. Next slide, please. As Kyle mentioned earlier, in 2016, there was a third task force on I&I, recognizing the need to continue progress with the I&I mitigation. We did convene that task force in 2016 to get some recommendations for moving forward. The task force was represented by communities across the region with experience in public works, finance, and administration. In all, the task force recommended that the council work with metro cities to advocate for public infrastructure grant funds on behalf of communities. The council develop a public outreach program that can be utilized by communities, develop a model ordinance and best practices for private property service lateral inspections that could be utilized by the communities, and hold workshops for communities and their consultants on the MCS I&I program, progress of mitigation, and requirements specific to I&I for the comprehensive plan updates. Next slide, please. And it's very easy to understress. We can't stress enough that the task force is really looking for assistance with private service laterals, the pipe that goes from the house to the city main in the street, and that those laterals and leaks from them represent an unquantified and unaddressed share of the total I&I in the system. It's estimated that up to 80% of I&I comes from these sources on private property, and yet less than 15% of investments regionally have been focused on those sources. I shared with you today, there are some great examples of programs that are working. Communities have requested assistance in developing their own programs. The following are a few examples where the council has provided some tools and resources. Next slide, please. More specific to some of the ones we mentioned earlier, the West St. Paul Memorandum of Understanding has the city doing private I&I repairs and reporting back to the council. And then ES is working on doing the meter analyses and reporting on those results. The Minneapolis Memorandum of Understanding, there's also a joint study there. That is a 5-year study that we're doing with the city, developing a hydraulic model to understand the flows now and into the future. And the city of Mound has done repairs to the MCS, and the council helped do repairs to the ES and city wastewater system. And Newport, we're also doing a flow study with that community. We are waiting on some flow data in order to complete that. Next slide, please. Engagement's pretty key, and not every community will have the same approach, but having the right tools is key to building an effective I&I mitigation program. So we provided those tools. We have videos, newsletters, graphics, messaging, and more can be found on our website. It's free and anyone can download it. A collaborative effort between the council staff and the cities. Last year, we launched an updated website with the aim to assist the public education. The toolbox includes the videos, graphics, newsletters, handouts, photo galleries, most anything the cities could need to have that communication with their residents. And I think I'll pass it back to Kyle to talk about the comprehensive plans.
Thank you, Marcus. Next slide. As Marcus indicated, one of the recommendations that came out of the 2016 I&I task force was a requirement for communities to include in their comprehensive plans more detailed information related to their local efforts and commitment for continued I&I reduction. This included approaches for addressing private property sources through financial incentives and characterization of the susceptibility of I&I in both the public and private collection systems. Some of the approaches for addressing private property sources within these plans include grants and loans. Sometimes communities will provide financial assistance for private property work. However, many times the cost of those grants are assessed to the private property owners over a period of time. There's also some communities have implemented a point of sale program whereby an inspection is required of the private service line and a certification of compliance is issued for those services that are found in compliance. Some communities require that the homeowner selling the property has that certificate before the property is placed on the market. Other communities requires that certificate before the transfer of ownership of that property after the sale. And other communities require that certificate to be obtained within a certain amount of time after the transfer of that property. And also another component is public education programs. Many communities have included or summarized public information or public education programs in their comprehensive plans. A common theme in many community comprehensive plans is the identified need for consistent, dedicated, and reliable sources for funding private property I&I assistance. As of today, there have been 82 comprehensive plan updates approved by the council that contain the required wastewater plans and the I&I elements. Approximately 125 communities will be required to submit a comprehensive plan to the council for approval. So we're about 2/3 of the way through the process. Next slide. Marcus and I have described the region's approach to I&I mitigation by reducing I&I at its source, an approach that was first agreed upon in the 1960s with the combined sewer separation programs and continued through today with the council's I&I mitigation program. Many other metropolitan areas took a different approach by focusing on system storage and capacity enhancements. Many of these communities have spent billions of dollars on system storage and capacity enhancements that are relied only occasionally during storm events and still experience spills, overflows, and backups in their system. In 2017, the EPA issued a report identifying a list of communities that have entered into consent agreements to address combined sewer overflows due to their continued discharge of untreated sewage into receiving waters. The Twin Cities was not named on that list, and in fact, recently, it negotiated a termination of the CSO permit, acknowledging the progress made by the regional communities in reducing the impact of excess I&I on the regional wastewater collection system. Next slide. Our presentation has shared many examples of infrastructure investment and summarized the sound policy decisions that led to us to reduce the likelihood of overflows and the control of regional treatment costs. But our work is not done. The aging infrastructure and the increased frequency of wet weather events, we still are at a future risk of overtaxing system capacity, resulting in the release of untreated wastewater into the environment if we don't stay vigilant on I&I source mitigation. Our recommendations to ensure that our system remains resilient includes continued investment in both the regional and local wastewater system assets, acknowledge that each community's susceptibility from I&I is unique and that a one-size-fits-all approach will not work. The regional program needs to tailor specific approaches for communities to address specific challenges that they face. Also, identify and advocate for reliable, consistent, and dedicated funding sources to support both public and private property infrastructure investments, and expand on the joint study approach with other communities that we currently have with Minneapolis and St. Paul, and plan to initiate with St. Paul this year. So with that concludes the presentation. We can answer any questions that the committee might have.
Super helpful. Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, sir.
Council Member Zarin, I would just like to relay a little story that I recently learned about, and I find it very analogous to this situation, I&I, in regards to inspections. A recent apprentice grad moving from apprentice to journey worker. We know that apprenticeship is a gateway to home ownership. Well, she bought a new home, and during the housewarming party, something happened. The sewer started backing up. And so I was reading the story. She was posting updates on Facebook and kind of getting a gist of the story. And I asked the question if that sewer had ever been inspected. And the answer was no. The home inspection did not entail looking inside the sewer pipe. And the result was from everything, all the old pipe had been removed except for one Y. One cast iron Y in that home remained. And that's where there was some buildup, and that buildup caused the backup into the home. And I think there's a lesson there that can be learned. If there was an inspection process, that backup would have been mitigated in the purchase of that home, as well as ensuring that there's no I&I in that home. I think I would really like to know more about going forward what the recommendations are of that committee that's putting things together, because it seems to me that a point of sale inspection really makes sense, that it could help to reduce your homeowner claims on sewer backup, and also reduce your premiums going forward. And maybe Councilmember Sterner could speak into premiums on that, since he's an expert on insurance. I just wanted to relay that story. I think it's very pertinent to the situation. Thank you.
Very pertinent indeed, and those can be some costly repairs to the homeowner, to the tune of $5,000, maybe $10,000, depending on how long the line is and what the damage is. So good points indeed. Councilmember Sterner, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to chip in on that Councilmember Zirin's comment. But yeah, usually on your homeowner's insurance, it's like $15 to $25 per year on that. So it's really inexpensive coverage that would cover a lot of turmoil on people's costs in that. Then, for $15,000, it's pretty reasonable cost. So I probably would encourage people to put that on their insurance.
Good advice. Councilmember Fredson.
Great, thank you, Chair. Just had a question related to slide number 11. And I don't expect a clear answer now, but I think this would be useful to know moving forward. So just in terms of the total number of dollars spent to try to address this challenge, and to what extent the Metropolitan Council has been responsible, or what percentage of money has come out of bonding from the legislature. And I just asked this question because I know that there's lots of missed opportunities here with the legislature's failure to pass a bonding bill this year. And I know that involved $5 million of, I think, matching resources for metro cities to help their communities address this challenge. So I just kind of wondered generally if you could answer what the primary source of funding for progress on this front has been, and to what extent Metropolitan Council has been the primary funder versus just passing through bonding money.
I can take a stab, Mr. Chair, Councilmember Fredson. I can take a stab at answering that question, and then ask if Marcus has anything to add to it. There have been a number of bonding bills that included money for I&I grant programs, and that money that comes out of the bonding bill is limited to communities to do work on the public side of the system. So the city-owned infrastructure. You're correct. There was, at the last that I'm aware of, there was a $5 million proposed I&I grant program under the current legislative session's bonding bill, which, as you know, didn't make it. Also, historically, there was one I&I grant program that came out of the Clean Water Legacy. I think it was for $1 million. That money was offered to communities to do work on private property. Both of those programs have a matching dollar requirement. I believe it was 50-50. And also the work for the public infrastructure grants had to be related to work associated with I&I mitigation efforts. So slip lining pipes, rebuilding manholes, putting solid covers onto structures where maybe the vented covers might result in stormwater coming into it. The grant monies could be used for those types of improvements. It couldn't be used for system expansion, for building bigger facilities to convey the I&I. It had to actually be focused on work associated with getting rid or reducing the I&I. The council also, through some funds from a previous grant program, also offered a little over $800,000 for private property I&I work back in 2008, I believe it was. So to date, in summary, grant monies for private property I&I, one came from the Clean Water Legacy, another came from the Metropolitan Council, about $1.8 million. And then from the bonding bill, I might have to ask Marcus to confirm the figure, but Marcus, do you know what the total bonding?
Yeah, 2007 to 2019, we've had 19.2 million allocated from the legislature for bonding to public facilities.
Okay, great.
And is it accurate to say, this is the chair, is it accurate to say that without that bonding bill coming through, that those funds for I&I will dry up, at least for the next 2 years? That there will be nothing?
Well, if I could jump in here, the comprehensive plans that have come in, one of the requirements was to include a list of activities specifically addressing I&I work. We were looking for line items in each community's capital improvement plan for I&I mitigation. And most communities have some level of commitment in their capital improvement programs for I&I mitigation work. But the other important fact to recognize is that through the bonding grants, for every dollar of grant money that was awarded to a community, I believe it resulted in about $8.50 worth of work. Is that correct, Marcus?
Kyle, Chair, yes, that's correct. About $8 is spent at the local level per dollar of state bond grant funding through the I&I program.
Thank you. So I keep...
Mr. Chair, I just think
Yeah,
that
please.
reinforces the need and the rationale for a large bonding bill. So hopefully the legislature will figure out a way to get it done either in August or September.
No question about that. And I would add to that having it in the comp plans or the capital improvement plans is a good thing, but that means that it's also up against other priorities for the city that the city does have, whatever city you want to choose, related to capital projects. So without really dedicated funding, consistent and dedicated funding, as you said, makes things a challenge. I keep seeing in various spaces, including on Roseville's website right before this meeting started, that information about surcharges or demand charges. But what I'm hearing is that that was a plan way back when, but it has been replaced by more of a incentive program. Is it accurate to say that there is no demand charges actually being levied at this point?
Yes, Mr. Chair, committee members, that is correct. the program, when it was initially developed in 2005, it offered the ability for a community to actually do I&I mitigation work as opposed to paying a surcharge and then getting that money back once the work was completed. And of course, many communities felt that it just didn't make sense to be surcharged and then have to do work in order to get reimbursed. So the program, as Marcus had indicated, no community actually was surcharged, with the exception of one community, and it was really it was kind of more of a local misunderstanding of the program. They did pay a surcharge for a very short period of time, but that money was refunded once they understood the program and proved that they had done work to mitigate the source of I&I. And in terms of the demand charge, the original task force in 2005 had identified, basically it followed up with the 1990 recommendation of the council or the sewer board and the Waste Control Commission of having an incentive and a disincentive program. Of course, the grants and loans was the incentive program, but the disincentive program basically was being reserved for those communities who either failed to address it or failed to get the excess I&I out of the system. And so the demand charge was actually a program where the surcharges would be collected from the communities and then kept by the council to make regional investments to build additional capacity and storage. So to answer your question, Mr. Chair, there's never been a demand charge assigned to a community. And in fact, the Water Resources Policy Plan was actually amended in 2016 or 17, I believe, to actually eliminate reference of a demand charge altogether. Still, the council reserves the right to implement it if it needs to, but it basically did away with the 2013 date that was in the original recommendation of the task force.
Okay, thank you. And about 40 some communities have work plans. Did I hear that correctly?
Marcus, do you want to handle that one?
Chair, it's actually a lot fewer. I think we're more in the range of 10 to 20 right now. The way the program works, as the excessive flow happens, we let the communities know about it. We let them know how much investment we expect them to make in their system so that we don't do any demand charge or anything like that. And then we work with them on figuring out ways to spend that money effectively. And that number kind of changes year to year. So 2016 was a big flow year. It went up. Some communities finished their work plans by 2017, 2018, 2019, a few more started up again. So it's typically around 10 to 20 most years.
Great, thank you. Other questions?
Mr. Chair, I keep raising my hand, but I don't think you
sorry.
can see me. This
I'm
is
sorry.
Councilmember Wolf.
Please go ahead. I'm not ignoring you. I just couldn't see you on my panel of people.
I figured as much. That's why I spoke out. But I actually was the chair of the task force that was in 2013 or whatever it was to continue the program, because originally it was like a one-time deal and then we were going to be done. And then when we had the task force, we talked about it and realized that the I&I program is basically just maintenance. It's normal maintenance that everybody needs to do on their system. And so that's why the determination was made to continue with it. As they said, there's not very many cities that are having to do this work right now because they've basically caught up on a lot of the maintenance that hadn't been done before this program was started. So now it's just a matter for a few places are cleaning up their remaining messes, but overall, it'll just be an ongoing, if there's cracks that appear, then they need to be fixed. But the big part that hasn't been done that staff alluded to is those service laterals. And we've been very successful at getting bonding money, but getting the Clean Water Fund money so that we can do the service laterals is really, really necessary, because it is a big burden for the homeowner, and they don't even realize most of the time that there's a problem, because a lot of time, oh, Phil's falling out of his chair or something there. But anyway, a lot of times the property owner doesn't even know that the system has a leak. It's going down into the dirt, but it doesn't back up. And I know when I was a kid, I grew up in Golden Valley. The house was built in 1938, and I think the pipe was pretty much gone by the time we moved out in 1976, because every year my family had the rotor-rooter man come and auger it out. And the person who bought that house from my parents still lives in the house from 1976. So in that instance, point of sale wouldn't work, because point of sale inspections didn't start until after 1976, and that same person has been living in the house. I don't know if she ever repaired the pipe, or if she's still having the rotor man come out and keep clearing off the roots. But the kind of thing like what West St. Paul is doing, because they have a severe problem with service laterals where they're taking a comprehensive look at it, is a good one, because you're looking at all the houses, not just the ones that are selling. And having that money from the Clean Water Fund to help chip in, if you take Clean Water Fund money and then the city chips in and then the homeowner chips in and everybody pays a third, it becomes pretty reasonable to do the repair rather than socking a big bill to a family, because it is a public health issue. It's been difficult to get the legislators to understand that having leaky pipes is a public health issue. The one thing that I would request from staff is, if years ago we had an estimate, this is how much has been spent on repairs and this is how much we've saved on not having to expand the system, and also we should be looking at not having to treat all that excess flow, because that takes energy, which costs money. It takes chemicals, which cost money. But if we could get a rough estimate like that again, to let people know this is how much money we've saved in the region because we're doing the right thing and getting this maintenance done and keeping the extra water out, that helps city council people tell their constituents when they have to pay, on their city water bill or whatever, or city sewer bill, or maintenance, that this is, maintenance costs money, but not doing maintenance costs a lot more. And this is how much more it would cost if you didn't do the work.
That's a great point. And on that point, I mentioned I was reading some information on the City of Roseville website before the meeting, and this is what they have to say. They say Met Council requires communities with excessive I&I to invest in local reduction remedies, such as disconnecting sump pumps and foundation drains from sanitary sewers and repairing leaky sanitary sewer pipes. Such actions will cost roughly $150 million instead of the nearly $1 billion it would cost to build additional sewer infrastructure to provide capacity during big rainstorms.
Mr. Chair, those are the old numbers that they came up with before, but that was a long time ago. So we need
that's what I suspected.
New numbers.
Right. That's what I was thinking, that someone has calculated this in the past, and it would be good to get some updated numbers on that. That's a very good point. And I agree wholeheartedly on the, like what West St. Paul is doing with their point of sale. And I know that the loans that they provide to homeowners, I believe, are 0% interest loans. So if you could split it 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, I think that's the way to go. Very good. Super fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else? All right, thanks again. And that takes us to our general manager's report. Lisa.
Thank you. I will just say that prior to getting I&I on the track that it was on, rainstorms were a lot more of a nail biting situation. Bill Moore used to talk about sleepless nights, thinking the phone might ring because of high flows into a plant and surges that were a little bit overwhelming. So I will happily report that I don't stay up those nights. I think about it, but I don't stay awake waiting for the phone to ring. So that's a testimony to a lot of great work that's been done and improvements to our facilities as well as the I&I work. But, you know, this organization has some real hardworking staff. They're doing really great things, and this is one example of that. And the other piece I wanted to mention, Wendy brought up, hey, what about our awards? What's up with those? So I did verify with the National Association of Clean Water Agencies had extended the deadline for those submittals to get in because of the pandemic. So they will be announcing the award winners in August. When I asked, they said, oh, and you should know that your 6 plants that were Platinum Award winners last time are eligible. And so we expect to hear that we'll have our facilities again getting Platinum Awards. And for the record, that means Metropolitan will get an 8-year record. This is 2019, followed by Empire with 12 years, and both Blue Lake and Eagles Point at 14 years of compliance. And then our 2 top performers in terms of longevity, St. Croix Valley at 28 years and Hastings at 29. Soon we hope to be 30. Even though we've got the pandemic going on, we've hit all our compliance numbers, and we're pretty confident that we'll do just fine this year despite the pandemic. That's my report for today.
Fantastic. Can I ask, are we still participating in the study related to COVID and wastewater? Your puppy would like to weigh in on this.
Willow has spoken.
A very loud dog next door barked, etc. That's one of the things about my coworker. Sometimes she's got a louder voice than I do. We are still participating, and there is going to be an article in the Star Tribune that I think is due out any day that will give an update. We're participating in the 2 within the state of Minnesota, and I'm not sure exactly how active we are on the original one because of the costs. I think we scaled back on that as we scaled up on the Minnesota studies, but we're definitely involved, and we will be coming back with information on the results that we're finding. We don't have a date yet for that, but the plan is to come back with another information item on.
Excellent. Yeah, I was reading about the University of Minnesota Duluth studies that we've been participating on, and it looks fascinating. Anything else?
That's it.
Anything else from other committee members? Things that you may have learned in the last week or two related to wastewater or from other committees? Very good. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you in a bit, and we are adjourned.